Welcome to What Resonates. This podcast is about tuning into energy, intuition, and what feels true for you. Each conversation invites you to notice what sparks curiosity and feels aligned, opening a wider field of possibility for yourself and for humanity. Keep tuning in and follow What Resonates. My guest on the show, Heather Ivany, has put together an exclusive offer just for our audience here at What Resonates. Find details in the show notes or the video description on YouTube. Welcome to What Resonates. I'm your host, Andrea Kennedy. In today's show, I am joined by Heather Ivany. She's a spiritual mentor and Akashic Records guide with more than 20 years of experience in yoga and spiritual teaching. She helps people who sense that there's more to who they are, understand their essence, recognize the probabilities in front of them, and take practical steps that bring a more aligned life into form. I'm excited for us to hear how Heather's work with the Akashic Records helps people focus on the present moment, approaches all of this in a grounded and expanding way, and I can't wait to see what resonates for me and for you. Let us know how the show lands with you and leave us a review. WhatResonatespodcast.com. Welcome to the show, Heather. I'm just thrilled to meet you.
Thank you, Andrea. It's a pleasure to be on your program today. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to just really start by asking you how do you describe to other people what you offer, what you do for them? What's the transformation?
Right. So when someone comes in specifically with the Akashic Records, primarily what I'm working with is supporting them with being more aligned with their authentic self. And so what I mean by that is incorporating sort of the whole nature of someone, not just their physical essence or their mind emotional layer, but also their divine self, their intuition. So, with the support of the Akashic Records, I help people identify what their intuition is, like how it shows up and how it wants to be amplified. And depending on the individual, sometimes I'm working with aligning them with their essence, and sometimes I'm working with expanding what's already there into a more like broader horizon line or expanded state.
Hmm. So, what do you mean when you say somebody's essence? What exactly is that?
Yeah, so I like to, try and use languaging that brings in all different types of individuals. So when I specifically always use the languaging of spirit or soul, I appreciate that your audience is probably super comfortable and familiar with it, but sometimes that can be a little bit of a trigger for people. Sometimes it can be far-reaching for people. So I like to also use other words like your nature or your essence, so that it brings more people into the conversation rather than having people sitting on the outside and looking in.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, people do come from all backgrounds, and just words can make such a difference, whether or not somebody's going to be open to listen, and to even moving forward. So that's a very thoughtful approach, I think,
Oh,
Heather.
thanks. Yeah, even I like to expand it even like when we go into conversations where we talk about people's spirit teams and their guides and their teachers that are working with them. Oftentimes, I'll use just the simple languaging of energies and frequencies that work with an individual because most people can get on board with the agreement that energy and frequency is in everything, whether we can visually see it or not. Everything is made up of energy, and that's a science concept, right? It's a something that most people can align with. And so when we talk in ways of saying, the energies and the frequencies that work with you, rather than, going really tight into like, Archangel Raphael is with you in this moment. Sometimes it's a matter of just knowing my audience and being aware of like, how can I speak in a way that sort of allows them to have less skepticism and cross-checking coming in and more of a listening and opening awareness to receive.
Yeah, communication seems like it's really at the forefront of what you do.
Yeah.
and how you engage with people, thoughtful communication.
Mm.
Um, and so you didn't always do Akashic records. You started with yoga, I believe, and we really do want to get into a lot about the Akashic records, but I'm curious, do you still do yoga now, or was that really more of an early, like an entry into where you are now and what you offer?
No, I still teach yoga, just not as often as I used to. It's still a part of my own personal practice as well. And anytime I'm leading, retreats where we get to be in a continuous experiential environment together, I always start off every day with a form of a yoga practice that we can come into. So how I kind of play with it is, when we're struggling a little bit to maybe open up in the way that we want to, or I'll use the languaging of like advance the way we want to, sometimes by just focusing on one particular layer of the body, makes it really rigid. So I like to sort of encompass all the different layers. So sometimes I'm working with people, like you mentioned at the beginning, like belief systems and what's limiting them from being able to access where it is that they want to go. And sometimes we just need to move the body because the energy is stuck in the physical body. And by moving the physical body, it helps to catharticize whatever it is that we're playing with. And it sometimes can help to create different state changes by moving the physical body. It helps to move the spirit body as well, because we kind of disconnect them so that we can comprehend them. But the reality is they're all highly integrated. So if one level isn't working, then I'll play with another. And even when I'm offering sort of like I have a monthly portal that people will come in and we'll do an Akashic experience together. I always start off with some form of a breath work or physical like shake or movement so that we can kind of disengage from whatever it was that we were doing previously. And it gives us more agency to be able to go into the places that we're going into together.
I really appreciate the perspective of the movement in the body coming together with this work, because I think for myself, it's really easy to forget. I'm so in my mind all the time, and it's so easy to not move. And so, what you've just shared is really resonated with me as far as, yeah, that's a message for me
Right.
personally to engage more in that, because you're absolutely right. It's all integrated. It all intertwines. It's all related. So, yeah, thank you for that. And so, um, yes, I'd like to start with how did you get here? Because did it start with yoga? Were you I guess let's start at the beginning maybe, and
Yeah.
if you could just briefly say, how does yoga, or how did yoga lead you into the Akashic Records? And I almost feel like we need to define what the Akashic Records are first, because some of our audience may not be that familiar with it, but at
Mm.
the very least, your definition and how you work with it, that might actually be more important. So let's start with what are the Akashic Records, from your perspective, and then let's backtrack and find out how you got there.
Sure. So I separate a little bit the Akasha from the Akashic records. Sometimes they're, spoken kind of synonymously, and I view them as very distinct ways that we can play with consciousness. So Akasha is the big field of what science will call the quantum field, or spiritual practitioners will call consciousness. Akasha is a Sanskrit word which translates into English as space or spirit. So, space directly connects to the quantum field, which is the study of everything, and space is everywhere. And then spirit is directly connected to the conversation of consciousness. So, whichever line of interest a listener wants to lean into more, it speaks to both. And then, if you want to get like a little bit more tunnel in a little bit more with the Akasha, it's the space from which everything arises from and everything returns back to. So it's both the origin and the destination. It's the field of oneness. It's the primordial space where anything that is in a material form originates from. So it's like the big arching, you know, energy or field that encompasses everything. That's the Akasha. But then when we go specifically into the Akashic records, every form of consciousness. So, like if the Akasha is the field, then the Akashic records is the memory. And every form of consciousness has an Akashic record connected to it. And so it's like a vibrational imprint that we have that has information or data connected to the entirety of the soul's timeline. So that includes both the present lifetime that we're experiencing, and then for those that are open to it, it also encompasses past lifetimes, whether it's in human form or, you know, other planetary form, or even in between forms existing in like a dimensional level. So when someone is an Akashic record reader, they're specifically dialing in to someone's GPS signal, or I like to think of it as like an old school radio signal. And once you're locked into that frequency, then you can start to ask some questions and get data that relates to that soul's experience in its timeline. Is that a new way of referring to it for you, or is it similar?
It's new in that it's very the way you describe it, it is more scientific sounding to me.
Okay.
And I have a science background. I have a degree in physics. So I appreciate that, hearing that approach. Other descriptions that I've heard before, it's kind of like, and I apologize to all the Akashic Records people out there, but my impression before has been sort of like a library in the ether
Yeah.
that you go visit and there's all these records and you look up something. But when you talk about the signal and that kind of thing and how you've laid it out, I don't know. I like that. It seems methodical. It seems grounded. It seems like I can wrap my head around that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, it's just not so um, nebulous.
Right, right. And so if you want to use the example that you're giving, which is the most common way that people think of the Akashic records, and the reason why I try and language it differently is because when people only know that particular description, then they get very fixated on that's the way that it actually presents to them. So there's a lot of people that think that if you want to access the Akashic records, you have to actually see an etheric library, which would be the Akasha. And then inside all the library books are all the forms of consciousness, you know, all the people, all the plants, all the animals, anything that has consciousness has an Akashic record. And then you pull one particular book off the shelf, which is your book of life, and you start to flip through it to get data and information based on your soul. So it gives those that are visual learners a very beautiful picture to be able to connect to so that the mind can comprehend it a little bit easier. But what I think it does is it sort of can pigeonhole the experience into one particular way that it can show up. And then we start leaving out those that really access the Akashic records through their claircognizance or their clairsentience or their clairaudio. And so personally, I never see an etheric library in the sky. And for a long time, I thought I was doing something wrong, or I wasn't fully in, or I wasn't quite getting it. And it wasn't until I started to be able to expand my own relationship with this modality to be able to see like there's so many ways that we can play with it. But of course, the way that you share it is the most common way, and that's how we describe it. And I'm also by nature very practical. Um, so I'm always trying to take, you know, these philosophical concepts and spiritual conversations and making them relatable to our everyday and making it more purposeful and practical. Otherwise, it becomes entertainment. And then it's like, what's the point?
Mm,
Right. And
yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that if that's what someone's looking for. It's just not how I choose to engage with it.
right. Yes. So that really sets you apart then from a lot of the people, offering readings and things like that, even writing books about it.
Yeah, I've just finished a manuscript like 2 weeks ago. So I'm now in the stage of now's the hard part for me. I don't know how to move it into the publication phase, but that was a big reason why I decided to write my own manuscript, is because I felt like there was so much that wasn't being shared about the Akasha and the Akashic records, and it also needed to kind of be updated to, the modern human, and how we are very much aware of our belief factors, and what sort of limits us from being able to connect to the non-physical realm. So there's a whole section in it that just really acknowledges the human factor that we all have, that's not meant to be shamed or ostracized, but actually brought into the circle with us when we're playing with these frequencies, because they're designed to keep us safe. And so why wouldn't they come in when we're playing with a field of the unknown? It
Mm,
wants to protect and keep us safe. So it's not that we need to eradicate it, but that we need to figure out how to allow it a seat at our table without letting it take up the whole room.
right. Huh. So, if you're coming at it from this unique perspective, you know, did that come from your training? And I guess now we're in the backpedaling stage
Right.
where let's peel away, let's kind of go back in time a little bit, because if so many people came to this and it's the library in the sky, you know, how was it for you that it didn't turn into that, that it's something greater?
Yeah, a big part of that is because I kinda, fought it a lot when it came towards me. It wasn't something that I was hunting for. So I will backpedal, and then I'll come into it a little bit from, more of a progressive angle. But my background is, I grew up in a very sort of standard upbringing. Nothing was sort of off the edge, if you will. So, regular middle class income. We went to public school. We attended church every Sunday. My parents had practical jobs, and so spirituality or was introduced to me more through Catholic upbringing. And as I explored through that growing up, I enjoyed the feeling that I got when I was connecting whether it was through singing or praying or ways that it was, but I really struggled with the container of the church itself. So when I was about 19 or 20, that's when I started to sort of branch out a little bit. In university, I took some courses on world religions, and I've always been a physical individual. So I've always I played sports as a kid growing up, and used running as a form of being able to process big emotions that I was experiencing in my late teens and early 20s. So when I first got introduced to yoga, it was very random. There was a time in my life when I was working as a forest firefighter, and we had to be within 100 feet of that helicopter for sometimes 10 to 12 hours a day if it was during the hot season. And so anything that you could do within 100 feet of the helicopter, you could do, but you had to be that close in case we got a smoke and we had to go out and fight a fire. This is before cell phones and, having Wi-Fi and all the things. So I contacted a friend of mine and I was like, I just need something to do here. And I don't want to just do push-ups and sit-ups all day. And so she recommended a beautiful book. It's called, I think it was the Woman's Book of Yoga and Health by Linda Sparrow. That was the first book that I ever was introduced to yoga. And so I would just practice these poses, and then I would teach them to the guys that I worked with, because they were also equally as bored as I was. And so this was just a way that we would hang out together. And I've always taught and coached in some capacity. I've had that in my nature since a very young age. I would, lead kids groups and sports teams and things like that. So teaching these guys what I was learning was comfortable for me. And at the end of the summer, I was like, I think I'm going to go and take like a yoga teacher training. This kind of interests me to kind of go into it a little bit further, because I knew I didn't want to be a forest firefighter forever. And I had a degree in phys ed, but at the time there wasn't a way that I could directly apply it without going back to school and doing another couple years and maybe being a teacher, which I didn't really want to be a traditional teacher in that sense. So through my teacher training in yoga, that's when I was opened up to be like, all the different facets of yoga were being shared with me, the physical aspect, the emotional aspect, the spiritual aspect. And that's when I really felt like I was coming home, because there was all these different sort of hats that I would put on during my day. Like I would meditate sometimes, and I would like to have deep conversations, and I'd like to move physically. And all these different ways that I like to engage, and even teaching. And this was where they all sort of got brought together into one modality. And so as soon as I started this training, I was instantly in like just deep, deep adoration for this practice. And so that began, I've been teaching for 25 years. My husband works out of town, so it provided me the opportunity to be able to work but not be gone long days with my kids. So, I could go and teach a class 1 or 2 in the evening, and I would do that 2 or 3 times a week. And I'd teach a class on a Saturday morning, and it just filled my cup to have that external experience that was outside of being a mom, but it didn't pull me away from the experience that I wanted to have by being a mom. So that satiated me for a very long time. And as I started teaching, I just naturally progressed from teaching to the physical body of like, here's how we do triangle pose, put your foot here and turn your hips this way and open your arms up and extend over. And then I started to add more conscious conversation and dialogue into my teachings. And then it was, right about a year and a half before COVID hit, where I was starting to really get hungry to be able to work with people in a deeper capacity than what I could get to in like an hour and 15 minutes of a yoga class. Or even when I taught yoga teacher trainings, there's still a confinement there because there's a curriculum that you have to get through to have someone be qualified as a teacher. So all I was doing was putting this petition out. Like, I want to go further. I want to go deeper. I don't know what it looks like, but this is just where I'm longing for. And then when COVID hit, my husband's aviation and I'm fitness. So both those industries instantly shut down here in Canada. So we were home full time with our kids. And it provided me the opportunity to be able to just have extended amounts of times to practice and meditate and be in my own experience. And through that, um, 3 nights in a row, I was in a meditative practice, and this woman's name came to my mind 3 times in a row. So by the third night, I'm like, I knew who this woman was. She was someone that I grew up with. I knew she worked with the Akashic Records because I'd ran into her a year before, and she told me, but I hadn't thought or connected with her since she told me that a year prior. So I just reached out to her and I said, hey, your name's come up in meditation several times. I don't really know what to do with it, but I get the sense that by just sharing this email, you'll know how to take it from here. And she beautifully wrote back and she said, well, this is actually how I advertise for my business is I have my guides go out and find other people that can connect with me. And so it's totally natural that you've come in this way. Why don't we set up an Akashic record reading and we'll see where it goes. And so that was my first introduction to the Akashic records. Was I had a reading with her, and what was really sort of the theme of that reading that stood out for me was that I had been kind of unconsciously working with the Akashic records for a very long time, and I just was being invited to bring it more to a conscious level. So for example, when I would teach a yoga class, people would come up at the end of practice and they would say things like, I don't really know how, but it felt like you were speaking directly to me because the cues that you were saying was exactly what I needed to hear. And my experience in the class would be like, I don't know why I'm saying the thing that I'm saying right now because it's not how I usually language, but I'm just going to say it. And so it would create this sort of community in this room of, apparent strangers in a sense, nobody knowing each other. But by the end of the practice, there was a cohesion that would take place. And so I knew that something was happening, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. And so that's where she kind of was helping me out in that Akashic reading, was by sharing with me, you're working with it in a very unconscious way, but let's see it, but if you want to, we can work with it consciously. So I did level one, what her version of a level one of an Akashic record training was, which is learning how to read my own records. I did that privately with her. And then within a couple weeks, I was contacting her and saying, I hope I don't sound arrogant, but I feel like I should be doing part 2. And to give you an example, like when I did my 200-hour yoga teacher training, I took 10 years before I did my 500-hour yoga teacher training. Like I like to integrate it's just the way that I am. I integrate for quite a long time. So to be coming back to her in a few weeks and saying, let's do part 2, which is learning how to read other people's records. We jumped into that. And then the part 3 is just going into plants and animals and anything else that you want to play with. You can go into the Akashic records of a business if you want to and see information that's there. So from that, that's when I was like, great. Now I live in a very small town. It's a very type A town. People are skiers and mountain bikers, and yoga is accepted here because this is just the age that we're in. But for me to start to talk about the Akashic Records, nobody's going to go for that. Like, there's no way that people are going to be able to identify with it or be interested in it. But the information that she shared with me was, she was like, you're going to go international. So just call it what it is and follow the breadcrumbs that take you there. And it was within 6 months that I started pulling in, people from around the globe to offer an Akashic training to, or just Akashic readings. And I've really just been at the mercy, in a sense, of how this wants to play with me, because my personality, my human essence, really would prefer something that's more tangible and what I would call practical. But the nature of my divinity is so lit up by what I'm playing with. And so I think that that's where the bridge between, like, something that's very esoteric and very cosmic, being delivered in a way that's grounded and practical, that's just, for me, if to share the why of that, it's the combination of me deeply honoring my human self that wants to have reason and why, and also honoring the divine self that just wants to play and engage and see how far we can go. And so when I'm trying to integrate with my own self, I have to let those two have a relationship with each other, and to be able to relate to each other so that they can share how they want to be showing up. And then I'm simply just regurgitating that back out when I'm sharing and offering with others.
Yeah, I love that story. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
It's
And
long.
no, but it's all right because it was quite colorful. There was a lot in there. And the thing that piqued my ears was when she said, "That's how I advertise."
Yeah,
And
it's
and
great.
I thought it's like so much better than Google Ads,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Yeah. How cool is that? I
Yeah.
love it. I absolutely love that. Um, and so when she taught you, or when you had that first reading, you know, and when you had your reading, I'm sure, you didn't know the behind the scenes, how
No,
to read. So
no.
you went in and you had a reading. Was there something in particular from that first reading that really surprised you, or was the catalyst for you to know that that path was for you?
It wasn't so much in the first reading. I sort of had my reading, and she offered the invitation to join her in studying more. And it was more like, in all honesty, the price was right, and I had time on my hands because of the shutdown. So I just said to my husband, like, hey, she's offering this. It's not like a big challenge to try and figure out how to make time for it. And it's not pinching the bank account too much. Like, why not? And he was like, sure, go for it. But then what really sort of was a sort of game changer for me was, so I've always been one where I didn't realize how much I separated myself from what I would call like the gifted ones, the ones that could do things like mediumship, or have a clairvoyance, or be able to, I didn't even wasn't really sure what the Akashic records were, but all of the sort of light working energy practitioners, there was something that I envied very much, but I didn't really think was reserved for me. So then when I went into the very first, like when we first sat down in our private one-on-one together, the very first thing she did when she was opening the records, she was sharing, she's like, oh, there's some souls that are here when I'm opening your records. And she's like, um, they're actually lost souls, and they're wanting to be crossed over. And what I'm getting is that I'm not to cross them over. I'm to just help support you with language as you cross them over. And so for me, that was like on a scale of like what you can do with energy work at the time, for me that was like a 10 out of 10, and I just was so blown back by how unpretentious this woman was. She didn't put anything on a pedestal, and be like, let me just do this fancy thing over here and you just stand by and I'll be with you in a minute. She really brought me in. And I think I've just been so used to, a lot of the yoga traditions. It's so much practice and austerities and, sacrifice and discipline that's required in order to reach these particular states that you can get to in yoga. And I don't discredit that, but it also creates a separateness as like that's the goat, that's the guru, that's the leader, that's the master, and I'm just this simple civilian over here that gets to watch that but not be a part of it. And so what I really appreciated about her in that moment is she was like, no, 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 like this is how I'm being guided to do this, is that you are actually going to do it, and I'm going to give you the steps, like some steps to process through it as we move through. And then what was really fascinating for me afterwards, just because I do have a deep inner skeptic that likes to challenge. So when we were done, like when we went through I got details as to who I was crossing over and what was happening. And I got very specific details about these souls. And when we were done our session that day, I went on to the Google search and did a little Google search on like um, the detail. And literally like a week before the exact scenario that I got details of, it happened, within 6 hours of my home. It was a murder suicide that ended up that I was working with in that moment. And so that just blew me away. And I had a couple more experiences like that afterwards, that were just, there wasn't anything that I could reasonably explain what was happening. And so then I just started to be a little bit softer with just what was happening, how it wanted to work with me, but still bringing the part of me along that struggled with it. Like even when I was learning how to read the Akashic Records, it wasn't something that was super easy for me. I had to, when we were doing part two, when we were learning how to read other people's records, the techniques that were being shared in that training didn't work for me. So I had to find my own system of being able to work with the records. And this teacher was great. And she showed me a way where I would do an energetic body scan. That was how I first started. So I would energetically scan like Andrea from the crown of the head. And I just go through crown of the head, any information that wants to come through. Okay, eyes. Okay, no. And I would just start to do these energetic scans. And that was the only way that I could read the Akashic Records initially, was just doing these very systematic scannings. And then after a year of playing with it that way, then it started to become more loose in the sense that I could say, hey, Andrea, welcome. You're coming in. Where would you like to go today? How would you like to explore? And it could be far more open and far more free. But initially it had to be very like structured in order for me to be able to access the record. So I bring all of that into my trainings when I'm teaching people, because um, most people have resistance in some way that is a barrier to them being able to access. And so it gets to be brought into the conversation and we play with it and we dismantle it together.
What an incredible first experience
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
had.
Mhm.
And so, what I'm curious about is you said you got details about those spirits, about those energies. How? Um, did the teacher do that? Did you get the details directly? And how did that happen?
Yeah. So it was mostly that, so where she was giving sort of support, where she was like, okay, so this is what's happening. Take a moment. Let's ground and get our roots in a little bit, because this is kind of significant what we're about to do. So I have techniques that I could do that. She didn't have to coach me on that part. So I grounded, I got settled, and then she just suggested that I open up my hands while we were sitting there. She's like, just open up your hands. And what I felt instantly was I felt a female on one side and a male on the other. And the female was actually holding hands with a child. That's what I instantly could feel. So I was just sharing, like, this is the energy that I'm feeling. And then I just was asking questions like, what were the detail, like, is there any details that and what I was also feeling was a deep love between mother and child, um anger towards the male, and zero remorse from the male. Like that, these
Mm,
are just all things that I was sensing and feeling. Like he's super indifferent with what took, I didn't know what took place, but I'm like, he's sitting over here indifferent. She's over here, deeply saddened, so much love for this daughter, and just has a lot of like um, sorrow that they're in the position that they're in. And so then my teacher was like, do you want to, is that enough? And I was like, well, I think so. She's like, you can ask if there's any details. So I just posed that question, like, is there any details? And so that's just what came, all that came in was murder suicide. That's what came in. And
Mm.
so then from there, she was coaching me with like, okay, now if you want to invite in the energies and frequency, or she would say their spirit family to come in and meet them. And you're simply supporting and encouraging them to cross over. You're not actually crossing them over. You're just giving them the choice that that's available there to them. And if they want to go, they can go. And I think what was so mind blowing for me that sort of made it not feel like I was making it up was, I think there was a part of me that still held the assumption that, in order, like, regardless of our faults or situations that we have here on earth, I sort of always held the impression that, when we pass, that there's a point where we get given choice if we want to, you know, hold, uh, hold out a hand to be loved unconditionally for the mistakes that we made in that lifetime. And when we choose to have some remorse towards that, then that's when it kind of dissolves into the oneness of love, and everything kind of moves into the, heaven gates, if you want to, or just the field of absolute oneness. But what was interesting was that this individual to my left, this man, there was no remorse, there was no regret, there was no wish I did it better. And still that energy moved across. And that was me watching that in a very like confused state. Like it was just reprogramming my own belief system on how things work, I guess, if you will. So that's what for me made it feel very much like it wasn't being made up, because what was happening is not how I would have directed it to happen, if that makes sense.
Right, unexpected,
Yeah.
right? Not
Yeah.
not in the framework that you maybe had at that time?
Exactly. And so that's what I love most about the Akashic Records, is that every time I'm in someone's experience of their records, I'm learning and growing and expanding alongside them, because it's just surprising how many ways that we hold imprints and belief systems and opinions and preferences that just get dismantled each time I'm in someone's records, because of what's coming through and what I'm sharing with them. And I'm like, oh, I've never known it this way, or considered that before, or knew this was possible. And so I'm constantly getting this beautiful teachings and wisdom teachings as I'm playing with it myself.
Yeah, and education, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with no set curriculum, no syllabus, it's just always new. I'm wondering, did you know you were that intuitive?
No. And it's interesting, because hearing me talk about it sounds like I'm not strong intuitively, but honestly, the only way that I sort of felt intuitive was, oftentimes when I would talk with people, I would sense or feel like my responses to what they were sharing was coming from almost like having a wider lens than what they were presenting to me.
Mhm.
And so I felt like oftentimes I was naturally doing mentorship without making it a profession, in a sense, right? Whether if it was friends or family members or whatnot. When I would hold conversation from them, I would sort of feel like the way that I would respond would come from a bigger field of like, there's something else that I know here that they're not sharing that I'm just going to speak to. So I felt intuitive in that sense. But even to this day, like my clairvoyant is quite limited. I don't even actually dream very much at nighttime. Like I have a very, smaller version of a clairvoyant. Now, my clairsentient has always been strong. And that's why I was such an active person growing up, because I would feel people's energy, and I didn't know what was happening, but I just knew that I had to like get a clean slate. And so doing some form of a hard workout was a way that I would sort of feel like, oh, okay, now I feel like myself again. But I didn't know consciously that what I was doing was releasing energy that I'd taken on during the day and letting it go back out there. So clairsentience has always been strong, but I never ever heard the words clairsentient or even empath until like my mid-20s probably. Right. So
Mm.
it was just a very instinctive way that I was working with it. And then claircognizance is also one of my stronger ways of relating. And that's where I would sort of sometimes get freaked out, where I'd be like, I knew that that was going to happen before it even happened. And I just knew that that was intuition. I thought it was fun, but I thought it was all spontaneous, that there was no way that you could actually relate to it. I just assumed that intuition was something that was super spontaneous. When it came in, super cool, awesome, thank you. But there's no way to actually call it in on demand, if you will, in a sense. So that was a learning curve for me as I moved into the Akashic Records.
Right, harnessing it for
Yeah,
purpose.
it's a great
For
word. Yeah.
yeah. What about, you teach these classes. Who are the classes for? Do they need to be intuitive? Do they what how, who
Yeah.
can do this?
Yeah, so I personally teach to a wide range of individuals. So some people that I'm teaching to are those that are like, I just want to be more connected to my spiritual self. I want to be able to have a deeper relationship, and I need someone to help track me as I go through this. So they're coming in because they want to. So what I do before any training with someone that's coming in, we book a one-on-one session together, and I identify with them what their strongest clairs are. So this is kind of, if you want to say, like a signature way that I teach. This is just what was sort of bestowed upon me when I was feeling the nudge to move into teaching people to read the Akashic Records. And I was just like, how? And so what I got from the Akashic Records was, use this technique. So what I do is I book a one-on-one with someone. They come in, we identify what their clair abilities are. And most people, I mean, COVID was very interesting. Most people are multi-claired. They're not just singular claired. But there will oftentimes be sort of a standard, or like a pecking order of like which one is strongest and which ones are still kind of in maybe a toddler or a teenage state, and which ones are more like in an elder state, right? So when I identify what their Akasha or what their clairs are, I just make note of that, so that when I go into a training, which are very small, they're anywhere from 4 to 12 people. Usually we sit around 8. Um, when we go into the training and we're doing different exercises together, if they're struggling in any way, I'm looking and being like, okay, well, Sue is super connected to clairvoyant. And so I'm going to ask questions towards her that's going to speak to her clairvoyant, ask rather than asking her how she's feeling. Like, what are you feeling in this moment? What are you sensing? And she's like, nothing. I'm like, yeah, because you're not clairsentient as your strength, you're clairvoyant. So any color coming in, any images flashing, any sort of movie reel pictures that you're seeing, is the darkness, that's like the nothingness behind the eyes, is that speaking to you and having messages? It's not always pictures, sometimes it's blank, right? So I get those individuals that are like, I just want to expand my intuitive gifts so that I can feel more in concert with the conscious realm. Perfect. Those come in. Then I have a whole group of people that come in that already are set in their vocation. It can be real estate agents, chiropractors, doctors, Reiki masters, massage therapists. I get a lot of talk therapists, counselors, and psychologists that want to pair this energetic realm with their vocation to amplify it more. So the
Mm.
way that I sort of describe that is, if anyone's familiar with essential oils, frankincense oil is this beautiful oil that's, it's the divine masculine, and I mean, it's so revered that it was, given to baby Jesus at his birth. But frankincense oil, what makes it so potent is that you can pair that oil with any other oil and it augments it, it amplifies it. So you pair it with a lavender oil, it's going to make the sleep qualities even more expressive in lavender. You pair it with a fennel oil for digestion, it's going to increase digestion, and so on and so forth. So it's this oil that can just be dancing with any other form, and it makes it more magical, more expressive. So that's how I sort of see the Akashic Records. You pair the Akashic Records with any other modality, and you're going to get a wider range of data about the house that you're trying to sell, as to why it can't sell, as to what the diagnosis is on the patient that you're working with that is struggling with digestive issues, but no tests are actually showing what's going on, or the Reiki teacher that's wanting to be able to have more access to share information about someone's essence or their spirit, either after session or during, depending on how they work. So it can be augmented and paired with whatever vocation someone has. And then the third modality that I work with is people that are similar to myself. They want to actually directly teach and offer, sorry, not teach, but offer sessions, offer Akashic Records sessions to other people. So there's those that come in as well. And then if they want to go on and teach other people how to read the records, then they can come in and mentor with me as well. So those are sort of the three sort of categories that I get in a training. It's those that want to enhance their intuition, those that want to pair it with a current vocation, or those that want to be super direct and eye to eye and give Akashic record readings to other people.
Beautiful. So I would like to hear, what can a reading do for a person? Because, we know what a Reiki session, what does that help with? Or reflexology or craniosacral, or even you mentioned talk therapy. Different modalities offer different things. And so um, for the Akashic records to have a reading, what can a person expect to learn?
Yeah. So my response is obviously going to be different than if you're asking the same questions to another reader. So I work very intimately with present moment. So I'm most amplifying present moment when I'm doing an Akashic record reading with someone. And I think what is a little bit signature with the reading that I do is that there's this moment when, after we've done like a grounding, so it starts with, we'll do a little grounding and centering to kind of clear out anything that we've been doing prior to arriving, and attuning the two of us closer together, and then also attuning ourselves into the non-physical realm. So after the grounding and centering, and when I sort of make a very clear statement that I'm only working with the energies that serve their highest and greatest, then I open up their records. This for me is like one of the most sacred moments in a reading, is allowing their personal Akashic records to permeate and marinate in this space, and I'm sharing that information with them. And I think quite often it gets skimmed over because people want to jump to their problems or their things that they want to talk about, which isn't any less significant, but really honoring like what makes this life experience that you're having right now so sacred, so miraculous, why your why your soul chose to incarnate at this time, giving information as to like, what are they masterful at already, what are they here to grow and expand. All of this can sometimes come in those first like 10 or 15 minutes that I'm doing a reading with someone. So usually what I'll say is like, I'm going to do the thing I do. I'll ground and center. I'll open your records. And then once your records are open, I'll take a moment to calibrate, and then give me permission to just be quiet for a moment while I just share all the things that the energies and frequencies that are around you want you to know in this moment. And so oftentimes people will get confirmation when I'm doing that. Um, they'll get a very deep, like, oh, like, yeah, like I knew this about myself, but no one's ever said it to me before. And sometimes people are really blown away because their sort of lighthouse light is so focused to the left and shining on whatever they're doing right now that there's this whole thing happening over to the right that they're just not aware of because it just hasn't been a priority for them. So I'll oftentimes give people a lot of insights as to like, yes, you're doing this and it's amazing and it's masterful, and this wants to be brought in more to what it is that you're experiencing. So I will spend, a good chunk of time just really letting that radio frequency share all the genre of the individual in that moment. And then sometimes where we go, if someone's super brand new, uh, we do sometimes identify their clairs in a session, because it's like, this is your form of engagement in life. This is how you feel most alive. So if you're not holding reverence for the part of you that, let's use clairvoyant. Someone who's clairvoyant is going to have an external clairvoyant and an internal clairvoyant. I work with the external and the internal. So an external clairvoyant is someone that walks into a room and they can see if it's set up in a way that's balanced. We call it like feng shui oftentimes, right? Like, is the room feng shui or not? Or they have a real creative eye for interior design or even for art or anything that's beautiful in nature. Like, they just have this keen eye to be able to see the detail. You can take the same individual into a boardroom meeting and someone might share a proposal of how they want, where they think the business should be going. And they can see the bigger picture and be able to know instantly, like, that's a great idea or that is not going to work, because they can see where it's going to go when it plays out. And then there's the internal clairvoyant, that when their eyes are closed and they're taking out their external sense of sight and they're going into their deeper clairvoyance, they might see in colors and waves and picture and form. And so if someone's denying their clairvoyance because perhaps they feel like it's connected more to childhood and not important in adulthood, or they have somehow been told that the way that they see the world is impractical or immature. So there's so many ways that these things get shut down. Oftentimes, I'll spend time just bringing the reverence back to it and the importance back to it, because when you're disconnected from present moment, you're disconnected from life force energy. And so if we want to feel more alive, we need to be more present. And how presence is expressed in the human nature is through our senses. You can be walking down the street and having a conversation with someone, and the moment you walk by a cafe and you smell fresh bread, you instantly get teleported into perhaps like a childhood memory of Nana making fresh bread when you're like super into this conversation with someone. So our senses will pop us into present moment so readily. And so the clairs that we have within us are how we feel alive in this lifetime. And so when we aren't connected to them in any way, usually there's a diminished life force energy. And how we transfer that into common languaging is the pandemic we have of mental health right now, because so many people are in their heads, disconnected from their bodies, and not relating to present moment in any way, shape, or form. So I'll do that in an Akashic reading. Sometimes we'll spend time with their clairs. And then I do always hand it over to them at some point. Like, it's their time, it's their money. Like, what is the significance of you booking the session? What is it that you want to play with? Um, a lot of times people are trying to get, more direction with a relationship as to how they can, work with it. And so what I make very clear is that I can go into the relationship between you and someone in the records, but I can't actually open their records without consent. Sometimes people are coming in because they want to know deeper navigation for their business. Sometimes they're coming in because they want to know for themselves, like, what their next steps are. And so we just go rogue wherever they want to play and dance and spend time, and we can go there. And sometimes the records themselves will be very insistent, like, this is really important. Like, we want to share this with you in this moment. And so sometimes we go into a topic that's really unexpected for them, because I'm just saying, listen, we'll go where you want to go, but let's also leave time for this, because it's really like knocking on my shoulder. And it wants to be expressed before our time is up here together. So I give them also one more thing, is that when we have, let's say we're working on sort of clearing something out or aligning with something more, I also love to take this beyond the energy and be like, great, let's do a transmutation. Let's clear out the static and noise of what's going on. And we live in this physical body. So can you also give us some practical, actionable steps that this individual can use in the everyday, so that those patterns don't get rewired and they don't default back into their old programming, and so that they can stay on the trajectory that they're longing for and have the momentum to rise above the mundane energy that might be around them at work or in the house. So I'm always asking for like actionable steps that they can apply directly in their daily life, to keep the momentum going of our session.
The practicality part, I'm so glad you added that, because I think people are yearning for that. I
Yeah.
mean, so much of what we talk about, in with these spiritual topics and healing and help and all of that is kind of out there a little bit, or it's theory or something. And to have practical, real things to help act exactly, you just put it so beautifully, but that recalibration that can happen, that can be the whole game changer for somebody, because to hear about it and all of that, that's one thing. But then you have to go back and live your life and
Totally.
carry on. You see a lot of people who come and they just want to know what their purpose is? And what's your take on purpose?
Yeah, purpose for me is energy. So it's continuously unfolding and expanding, and it's unfolding into our becoming. So I don't think we always evolve by expanding. Sometimes we evolve by integrating and grounding. Um, so for me, purpose is not static. It's malleable. And so as I grow and develop in my own sense of self, my purpose is going to grow and expand with me. So for example, I was not on purpose as a yoga teacher and mother, because now today I'm doing the Akashic Records. The Akashic Records, if it came in my 20s, I would never have had the time for it, because I would not have been able to I resist things that are fluff, things that feel very like you know, when I hear people talking in language of, everything is love and light, and really not holding space for all the emotions that are a part of this experience, that's how I would have perceived the Akashic Records in my 20s. I would have seen it as like another modality that's just disengaging and spiritually bypassing rather than integrative, right? So in my 20s, my purpose at that time was being a full-time yoga teacher, was being a full-time mom. And then as I'm evolving and growing and expanding, it's growing and evolving and expanding as well. And is my purpose fully being an Akashic Record guide? No, because there's going to be times, as you know, in business where things ebb and flow. And when I'm in the downgrade of like things being quiet and slow, it doesn't mean I'm disconnected from purpose. It means purpose wants to show itself in another lens. It wants to be expressed in a different way. And that might simply be through rest, if anything else, right? So for me, I do get a lot of people that are coming in because they want more clarity of what their purpose is. I don't think that's wrong. I think that's very natural for us to hunt for that. Like, why am I here in this lifetime? Who am I? Know thyself. These are like the quest of the human since the beginning of time. So that's very natural to want to explore that a little bit more. But sometimes, in order to be aligned with our purpose, we need to be aligned with our divinity. Otherwise, we're constantly going to go external to understand what our purpose is, because we don't have the tools to go internal and see it for ourselves. So sometimes it's disappointing when someone comes in, they're like, I want to know what my purpose is. And I'm like, I'm actually getting that, we need to spend more time on, maybe dismantling some of the belief systems you have about connecting to your own spirit, and so that we can give you some actionable tools to be able to meditate for 10 minutes without being totally scratchy and itchy in your body, right? To be able to be in silence and not think it's less than noise, right? So sometimes, and then come back to me in 3 or 4 months time when you've been playing with this for a bit, and then maybe purpose is going to reveal itself more, because it will land at that time. If it comes in right now, it's not going to land, because there's no way that you can play with it, because you don't have any way to engage with it.
That's intensely wise, Heather. I love it. I love it. Yeah, I like that, because, that's a real answer. That's not a pleasing answer. And yeah, I appreciate that you would have that conversation.
Yeah, and that's a hard edge to, as a practitioner, to really be like, I'm fully committed to sharing the information that wants to come through, not focused on making sure the person has a good time.
Yes,
Yeah.
that to me is integrity.
Yeah, yeah. And I thank you for bringing that forward, because it's a way to talk about it out loud. I think is important for all of, because you do have a lot of practitioners that are listeners to your show, for sure. And so that's
Absolutely.
something that we all need to be aware of, is like, when am I people pleasing? Because that's very much our nature,
Hmm.
versus really like being an employee to the energy that wants to be shared at this time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like we have hardly even scratch the surface of all of this. I just find it so fascinating, and I appreciate the clear ideas, the way you've presented things. And I mean, we could say the word grounded again, but there's a clarity with which you speak. There's an honesty with which you speak. And I appreciate that you went to a couple of places there that really did illustrate, how you're coming from this work and into this work, and how you represent the possibilities that it affords us, if we will engage with it, investigate, and know it as something other than the library in the sky.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you. If people want to go further with you, how can they best do that?
Yeah, easiest way is to just go to my website. It's my name, heatherivany.com, Ivany. And I have a range there of like free, if you just want to play with some free things to get to know me a little bit more. You can book an Akashic reading right from there. You can see when my next training's coming up. I don't have retreats lined up for 2026 just yet. But I sort of try and offer experiences that are like, if you just want to bite, here's what you can play with. If you want to go a little bit deeper, here's where we can explore. And if you want to just meet in person and be fully integrated for, 5 or 6 days at a time, we can go there as well. So that's probably the easiest place for people to get a little bit more about me. And then I'm really open. Anyone can send me an email at any time and ask questions without, further obligation afterwards. Yeah, it's great.
Fantastic. And so, as we leave today, is there something that you would really like to convey to those who have tuned in? What's exciting to you in your work, or what stands out? What is rising to the surface for you to communicate at the moment?
I think what I'm playing with most in at this time, and given sort of like our global kind of you know chaos that's taking place, uh, I play a lot with um, where do I hold hierarchy in contrast, right? So a lot of the conversation that we sort of been having, I think indirectly, is like the human experience is not any less than the divine experience. And vice versa. And so where I really like to play within my own self is noticing where I hold preference, noticing where I hold hierarchy, and seeing if there's an opportunity to bring that more towards the midline and bring what I'm sort of pushing away towards the midline, and see if there can be more of an equanimous relationship between the two. Because what I've sort of experienced in my own life is it's those little micro enlightenments that have a bigger impact, like a layering effect, than when we go for these like really expanded ecstatic states that are temporary but explosive, but they don't have a root system to them. So we can sometimes get really discombobulated afterwards. So what I used to think was like, oh, onwards and upwards is the best way to enlighten. And what I'm noticing in my like, second half year of life is like this finding the space between two things that are apparent opposites and seeing if they can get along a little bit better within me and my viewpoint of life. It's very rich. It's very encouraging, and it makes the inner warring with myself a little less intense.
Beautiful. Thank you for an intelligent and rooted conversation. I so appreciate it, Heather. Thank you
Well,
for
thanks
being
for
with us.
bringing me on. Yeah, you really, you took a risk by not knowing who I was at all and just inviting me to come on, and I take that with a lot of responsibility. So thanks for bringing me on board. Thanks, Andrea.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for tuning in. Keep trusting your truth, keep listening to your inner wisdom, and keep following what resonates. To sign up for the newsletter, leave a review, or connect, visit whatresonatspodcast.com. You'll also find everything linked in the show notes.